Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Outdoor Man. So, on this week's episode, it is with the Field Sports channel. Now, Charlie didn't have to talk to me. I contacted him through a friend I used to work with, or work for, more to the point, and asked him to sort of talk to me and point me in the right direction regarding my podcast, and actually asked if he'd do a podcast with me, and he agreed. It took a bit of to and fro in, but actually it happened the other day. A great man, like I said, he didn't have to take his time, he didn't have to talk to me at all. So a huge thank you to Charlie and the Field Sports channel, and just a huge thank you to what they do in the countryside. Really, all their videos are interesting one way or the other. Like I mentioned before, on there, they've done a great one with moderators, same moderators for rifles, and done one with semi-automatics. I have to say they're wrong on the semi-automatics. The Benelli's the best one, but hey, I have to say they mentioned the Remington 1100. Fond memories with that shotgun as well. So without further ado, check them out. Give them a like, share, have a look on YouTube at the Field Sports channel if you haven't seen it already. How's tricks at the Field Sports channel? Busy?
It's really busy. We've got. Sorry, just messing around with the audio.
Right.
So we've got a kind of reactive job to do and an active job to do. The active job is to find ways of presenting shooting sports in a way that changes people's minds. But this week it's all about reactive. So we've got Channel 4 News has basically doorstepped a grouse shoot up in the North Yorkshire Moors.
Yeah.
I think in two extraordinarily they did this really badly. First of all, they jumped the shoot, and about 2 years ago, BBC Radio 4's PM programme did the same thing, and they went down to a hunt on Exmoor, and they jumped the master and recorded what to them sounded like great pantomime, but from a hunting point of view, was just an awful fishing expedition by them. Channel 4 have done the same thing to grouse, and they've compounded their crimes by, we reckon it's contempt of court, because they are saying a gamekeeper is guilty of killing a goshawk. The gamekeeper is not guilty of killing the goshawk. You can't go around prejudging these things before we have a court case on account of our democracy, really.
Yeah.
So they're in trouble. Then we've got, shouldn't have asked me, now I'm going to tell you. Then we've got the badgers. The badgers are the anti-badger cull people. They're a small group of nutters who are really dedicated to stopping badger culling in the UK, and they've started releasing a whole lot of names and addresses, including my name. They've revealed that I am a badger cull contractor and I think this is a marvellous example of how disappointing it must be to be both a badger cull contractor and an anti-badger cull contractor. They found out in 2017 I went out 4 times and I didn't shoot a single badger. Doesn't look good from their point of view. So they're making hay with that, and they're trying to whip up support and say we will release 20 names of badger cull contractors. It's quite possible they only have 20 names and they've just released them. So I'm not quite sure what they're going to do next. We're going to carry that story today, and we have this. I call him the new news editor. He's been with us for 6 months now, Ben O'Rourke, and he picks up what seem to be, on the face of it, slightly peculiar stories, and then he goes and does them, and suddenly, they fall into place, and you go, wow, that's great. So he went to do seagulls in Scarborough this week, on the basis that Natural England says seagulls are very rare, and Scarborough says no, we want to get rid of them all. So you have a kind of government department versus government department thing going on there.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, very busy. How about you? How's your life?
Mental. Pheasants, work and life, and then trying to do this podcast as well. And I probably should have eased off and done, an episode once a month or once every sort of 2 or 3 weeks. And I jumped in straight, both feet, and decided one a week. So try and keep.
You are a very, very brave man. I mean, one thing you must try very hard not to do to yourself is kill yourself with this stuff. Don't push yourself over the edge. You've got to keep sane enough to keep doing it.
Yeah, so I might step back and do like release one every other week. But to be honest, I've had some fantastic comments back. My mum must love me a lot because I've had, what was it, 200 and, oh, I can't tell you one, 259 downloads overall so far.
Oh, fantastic! Well
so
done.
I'm really pleased with how it sort of snowballed, and it has snowballed massively.
It will. You'll find it will go from 0 to 10 will take a certain amount of time. 10 to 100 will take about the same amount of time. 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10. It's funny. It feels like the same lump of time that it takes to get from each to each.
I've the two I really want to do, both chats want to do is Dad at home at Sandringham, because Dad's on a third or fourth generation on the estate itself. So just Dad's story alone will be a fantastic story. And then
I've just done my dad actually, and it's really funny because you whether you like it or not, you come at it from the position of being his son. So and that is kind of very attractive from a viewer point of view. But at the same time, it's a complete minefield. You hear him going off on one of his things. Your natural reaction is, "Oh, for goodness sake!" But actually,
I had that.
They want to hear it.
Yesterday morning, I don't watch the news because it boils my piss a little bit, and so I took the car down to the garage and thought when I walk home I'll ring Dad up and just see how he is, and I usually get him when he's walking the dogs out in the morning, and so the first thing I got was effing and blinding down the phone because he was shouting at a pack of dogs anyway. I went, "You right?" He went, "Well, yeah, I'm all right. I know what you can do with this podcast," and started straight into me about it. I went, "Right, okay." He's not against it. He's totally for it because he knows that I'm trying to promote the keepering and the field sports in our positive light. And he goes, "We're acting on Channel 4. They're persecuting gamekeepers. We're all tired of the same brush." And in literally 5 minutes, he was just on one. I was like, "Yeah, all right, Dad. I know. I get where you're coming from, but we've got to do something. We've got to stand united and do something."
Yeah, it's exactly. It's about explaining that we're human beings and changing the social license and getting people to understand it. How old is your dad?
He's just about ready to retire. A couple more years, so he's in his 60s now. So he's just getting.
You see that? So this is the thing. I think it's going to happen to all of us as well. But there's a kind of moment where the bins become really important in people's lives, and it sort of sounds like you just hit that moment with the. If he watches this, he'll go, "What's he talking about?"
Yeah, no, he's getting like that. And actually, they went. My dad and my stepdad went shopping a couple of weeks ago. We went, "Oh, we had to go on Friday this week and not on Thursday." Like, "That's how it starts, Dad. That's how it starts."
He'll now hang you up by your thumbs for taking the mickey. So.
Oh, literally, yeah. And then the other one I want is Bill Meldrum, who was Dad's head keeper.
I know. Yes, I remember. Yeah,
obviously Queen's gun dogs and everything else. So, and his stories are just phenomenal. And the people he knew. I mean, just for instance, I went to the head keeper before Bill's funeral a few years ago, and so Jackie Stewart was there, and he done a reading about that head keeper, and it was just amazing, and it struck me then how we all sort of fit together in the world, and it was just fabulous, really.
It's a funny thing that we don't really realise it if we're kind of under pressure to put stuff out on a weekly or whatever it is basis, but we're also doing this thing where it's possible YouTube is here for a long time, and if you put this out on YouTube, people will find this in 100 or 200 years' time, possibly. And it will be a snapshot of a way of thinking. If you imagine, if you came across an interview with your great-great-grandfather on YouTube, how fascinating that would be.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what you're doing, really.
Yeah.
There's so much about media, which it's an instrument for changing people's minds about things for sure. But there's a whole sort of raft of stuff like. What you put into it is important. Who you talk to is important. What you talk about, what you don't talk about when you do an interview is really important as well. It'll allow people years from now to see what the taboos were, as well as what your mindset is. There's just a ton of stuff there.
Talk about, as you say, about talking about great grandfather. My first podcast I actually put out was with my granddad.
Wow.
He was a big bird man. So he'd done a lot for the BTO, for the ringing, and that side of things. But also he was a big wildfowler and had a massive obsession with the pink-footed goose. And
you're in the right part of the world for that, aren't you?
Oh yeah, big time.
We don't have so much of that down here. My dad was a BTO ringer as well, and he was a very keen shooter. And I remember he introduced me to Peter Scott. So Peter Scott, who was the wildfowler and naturalist, and it was a sort of thing. They were kind of that age when, you know, the 19th century naturalist who would collect specimens with a shotgun. That sort of a little bit like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, they've got so much of that I wanted to put across, because we're now moving into an age where it's all a bit clinical, really.
Yeah, everything seems to be a minefield nowadays.
Yes, it does.
I've come to the conclusion, sod it, and nobody is pushing like yourselves. You know, nobody's pushing out us doing the positives. No one's filming the hunt. You know, cover laying and seeing that come back and all the, you know, the young birds and everything else. And it's
nobody's
wrong.
doing. We don't have the vocabulary for it. So it's one of the things about Donald Trump is he's amazingly offensive and rude and horrible, and obviously half of America think he's wonderful and half of America absolutely hates him. He seems to me, he sort of nearly but not quite established a vocabulary for being able to kind of shout back against this kind of creeping PC-ness that's moved across the country and is stopping people from talking freely, really. But we haven't quite cracked it. I mean, I think he's on the way to getting that vocabulary together, but it's not a vocabulary that people, you know, on the BBC use, for example. So obviously we haven't kind of persuaded the world that it's a good way of doing things.
Everyone's talking about being offended, and at the end of the day, that's only your opinion, and you haven't got to agree with it, but you're not going to catch some horrible disease and die because you're offended because that person said that, and it's just...
I don't know. It's a funny thing about, so your grandfather, my father, your father probably wouldn't, you know, they struggle with this idea, but since it's become a criminal offence to think something, you know, since thought crime is now a thing, and to me it sort of seemed to start kind of late 1990s. That's kind of authoritarianism came in. It's been very difficult to kind of pick our way through. Well, it's been both very difficult and very easy to pick our way through it, because the fact is we do live our lives by that. We're not, generally speaking, casually racist and things like that, because we find it easier to avoid the flack, and also because there's a line from a good American musical which is about everyone's a little bit racist, actually. So there's that. But and it's just, the authoritarianism, you know, has good things in the sense it stops us from being casually rude to people. You know, perhaps it improves our manners, but we seem to have lost sight of the manners itself, and we've lost sight of the kind of freedom of speech which goes with that. And we haven't established a vocabulary that allows us to express ourselves within that framework. It's a rather muddled way of putting it, but that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I think millennials have got a lot to answer for, unfortunately, and unfortunately I fit into that category. But you know, it's just, and that's why
you're the problem.
Yeah, literally, yeah, it's just me. But you know, that's why I've changed my tact. I say I've changed my tact on the podcast. So it was literally like going to be very much like the Phil Sports channel, very much countryside pursuits. But I thought, am I going to get the right people in listening to what I'm trying to say? So I then went on and I spoke to somebody from the Suffolk Trail Festival. I spoke to a friend who does primal fitness, all things that everyone's interested, and tried to drag all, like, you know, big wide net, scoop it all in, and then hopefully subtly get what I want to say in there.
If you establish you're about hunting, shooting, fishing, field sports, then actually that gives you a pretty good starting point to talk about the great outdoors, because people, people start watching something or start listening to something for one reason, and they carry on listening to it for another reason. So, for example, it might be the picture, the thumbnail, which says hunting, shooting, fishing people talk to each other. So you go, right, I want to listen to that, and then it could be about hedge laying or something like that, but it doesn't matter because it comes from a hunting, shooting, fishing position.
Yeah,
people quite like that. Now, I don't think there's any shame in that. It's actually something which we often look at Top Gear, which is a car program, but it's not really about cars.
Not anymore.
It's really about lifestyle, isn't it? So they have kind of moved from. I used to work in magazines, and we call it specialist consumer to lifestyle. They've moved from one to the other, and that's been quite good. But yeah, what we really want to do, to be totally famous, is for you to put a picture of Princess Diana on the thumbnail of your video, and then you and your dad just basically sob at each other for half an hour and end on a bit of laughter. And that's the perfect podcast. There you go.
Yeah, that would. Yeah, funny you should say that. When I approached Nick about the podcast, the first thing he said was, "Go speak to Dad. Use Sandringham. Plug it, and you'll just take off." And but you know what he's like, because obviously he's the Royals is what he does really, apart from everything else, and does very well. I better say that just in case he watches this. But and the thing is, what he said to me was right, and that was that exact that. People want to listen to that sort of thing. What was the phrase he used? The normal. The abnormal normal, or the normal abnormal. So, like, I've got...
Yeah, I don't know that one.
So, for instance, I grew up at Sandringham. I've got stories I could, tell about the Royals and with the Royals now. And to me, that's just a normal day. But to somebody else, that is an absolute amazing story, For instance, when... I was walking, so I must have been sort of around the 2 marks. The Queen came round because she wanted to see something in the house that had been done, and I was marrying around the bathroom. Next minute, I'm clambering into the bathroom, and she pulls me out. Our stories at home, that's just a normal story of Dan being an idiot. But to somebody else, wow, the Queen pulled me out of the bath. It's
Queen saves gatekeeper from drowning. Marvellous. I can see it in the Daily Mail. Yeah, well, the trouble is, of course, you've got to try not to tell those stories. Otherwise, they see that as... Don't forget what happened to Marion Crawford, the governess who wrote that extremely innocent little book. Don't be Crawfy.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's we get in the world of shooting and hunting and fishing, we get amazing access to amazing things. And when I was more of a kind of frontline journalist 1,000 years ago, people, I had one really grumpy old Sunday Times sub who said, your problem is you're a PR for the upper classes, Charlie. All you're doing is talking them up. And I was thinking, well, it kind of has a point, but it's not so much about the upper classes with me. It was more about the countryside as a whole. But yeah, we get fabulous access, and there is no point risking that by talking about the people we meet doing anything eccentric. Where it all falls down is when you don't talk about people you meet doing things eccentric, then the antis go, "Oh, you're hiding all the dead goshawks and the dead hen harriers." And this is the bit which I struggle with, because after 30 years of writing about shooting, I still haven't come across the dead hen harriers and the dead goshawks.
No.
Anyway,
it's a funny one, that, because it's just it happened it happened a long time ago, that sort of thing. And I'm not saying gamekeepers don't do it now, because I'm sure there's some corrupt gamekeeper out there, but it's such a small minority, and we're all tarred, unfortunately, with that big career soap brush, and it's wrong.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a minority. I think they like to characterise gamekeeping as basically a couple of old blokes who walk around fields in the British countryside. They don't seem to realise it's thousands of people on thousands, possibly tens of thousands of shoots around the countryside. And for the antis, the countryside is that green thing outside their train window. Yeah. And so they see it as very much a sort of snapshot. And if it's not covered in trees and bursting into flames in April, then they think there's something wrong with it. For us, the countryside, well, I was trying to pushed this line the other day on some ITV or radio program or something. And the countryside is basically it is half farmed and half shot over, and then there are a few small little places which are preserved, wildlife reserves, and that's owned by the RSPB. But you have to remember, the RSPB only owns a tiny amount of land, and I don't think urban people or people who don't understand the countryside really understand that all the bits are farmed. You can see those. They've got grass growing in them. There's plough. There's crops growing in them. All the rest is shot over. The whole lot.
Yeah.
So anything with woodland on it it's there for hunting and shooting.
Yeah, I said I was talking to somebody. Somebody was taking the mick at me about the podcast, and I said, well, we need to do it because people don't realise the the money, not just the money spent on shooting, but the deals that are done through a shoot day. The thousands of business that affects them aunties' lives and various bits and pieces, because they're businessmen that come from the city, they come and shoot, they do their deals, whatever they're doing, and that has a knock-on effect. And it's just little things like that make the whole world go round.
That's been left out of the whole kind of the whole conversation. And they could do that on the golf course if they didn't have shooting, or they could do that elsewhere. And one of the guys we do a lot with, Neil Roundtree, made a very good point the other day. He said, Scottish estates, he said, are like super yachts. He said, if you ban them, you will harm yacht builders. You won't harm the owners. If your aim is to harm the owners of Scottish estates, banning Scottish estates is not going to harm them. But I do think there's something which the miners failed to make the case for, the dock workers failed to make the case for, and now we are struggling to make the case for, is the sense of community that hunts and shoots offer. I was listening to the radio this morning, listening to a couple of extremely wealthy ex-football managers talking about how the government must put money into football because of the important community side of football. And I was thinking, well, yeah, but there's also the important community side of the hunts and the shoots. I mean, they should put money into that if that's what they're worried about. But we haven't really been able to express that.
Yeah, we are very bad as a community on pushing our pluses.
Yes, we are.
The shooting, hunting, the whole lot of us is just a huge amount of the population, as it were, have just really done the ostrich effect and put their heads in the sand and go, it'll go away. And it's not.
Well, so I've got a question. Did you see the Channel 4 news piece about the Baltimore on that?
I was looking for it before this and I couldn't find it.
Well, it's on YouTube, so pop a link into the description because it's worth watching, just as a kind of test case of how not to, I would say, deal with a reporter situation. So basically, the reporter extremely unfairly doorsteps a shoot, so that everybody's unloading on the side of the road. There's 4x4s, there's people with dogs, and he's got a long microphone on a boom, and he's got a cameraman walking behind him, and he goes up to people and says, "What do you think about this goshawk that's being killed? What do you think? What do you think?" And people just don't know how to answer. So there's a shot of an old man. He winds up the window to his Land Rover so he doesn't have to talk to a reporter, and it kind of looks bad. There's another shot of a couple of I think they must be shoot staff retreating, walking away, and they're walking away quickly to kind of get away from the reporter. That looks bad as well. So obviously Channel 4 was delighted with this sort of whole theatrical idea. But if you're out on a shoot and some reporter comes along with a microphone and a cameraman and they doorstep you in the same way, how would you react? What would you do? Or at least tell me what you'd like to do and then what you'd really do.
I would like to keep my cool. I would try and answer the questions honestly as I could. If I was being asked, say the goshawk incident, if I was asked, do you agree with it? I would say I don't agree with it, and I would say I wouldn't like to be tarred with the same brush if that lad is found guilty or not. And I would push him, or try to push him towards somewhere like the Countryside Alliance, who can deal with them questions better. So I'd go, this is my opinion, but if you really want to, to talk to somebody about this properly, I would go to. And I would try and sort of do a bit of slopey shoulders and try and just deflect it that way.
I think you're spot on. I think that's exactly the right, because all they want is a shot of somebody behaving like a human being, and that establishes that shooters are human beings. After that, all those pros at the shooting organisations. I mean, I wish we'd had advance warning of this, because this is the kind of media which we can deal with at Field Sports Channel really well. We've got all the covering shots. We can extend interviews. They can put our shots of grouse over it where they're making the case for grouse shooting. So anyway, yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
And I think it's a shame that people have got. I think they've got to do that, to ambush somebody to try and get that story, and it not been done right. I think
it was bad. I think it was pretty bad reporting. All in all, I can see how they came up with it, but they came up with it a bit like you come up with a script for a Christmas panto. They didn't. It was not there to help the argument along in any way. It was a PR job for the Antis.
Am I right in thinking that Channel 4 has been under investigation anyway for a few?
So Channel 4 or its holding company has invested in a whole lot of vegan or vegetarian food businesses, and just at the time they did that, they suddenly started running what we call PUF items, pure public relations items, on their news program about vegan food and vegetarian food. And you thought, okay, this is a bit of social engineering they're engaged in here. Then again, there is an argument that news can be partial. So if you're talking about how you get your news and what news you listen to, something that's really, really changed in the last 20 years as well is people are incredibly well informed. I think it's one of the reasons that people like Chris Packham will fail, because they belong to that old-fashioned, top-down, man on the M-industry roof tells you what the weather's going to be, you go off believing that. That's changed. The motto of the modern TV viewer is, I'll be the judge of that. And with that in mind, you're able to present news, say, from Field Sports Channel, that comes from a platform of being hunting and shooting and fishing, because people know that and they're able to judge that situation. Now, people still rely on the BBC and Channel 4 to be absolutely balanced. So when they are partial in favour of, with the Channel 4 in favour perhaps of vegetarian or vegan businesses they've backed, in terms of the BBC, they seem to be in favour of, what goes down quite well in an Islington restaurant doesn't seem to be, actually what reflects the wider belief of the countryside, of the country. Well, you have got to change your perception about what the BBC is. I listen to a bit of radio when I'm sitting here, and I do like listening to Radio 4, but it just sends you up the wall with its kind of casual failure to acknowledge 90% of the UK population. And there's a new radio station that's just started up from the Times newspaper, and it's not right-wing. It's not Fox News. I'm not right-wing, so I would spot it if it was. And it's really good, I'm afraid, and I really enjoy it. And so I've pretty well stopped listening to the BBC now.
Yeah. The BBC have had such a fantastic platform to do something good for the countryside, and they really haven't. This was the thing that started me off with the podcast, was Countryfile, and and how much that, when I do watch it, the other half has to come in and turn the TV off, because I start sort of almost chewing the TV up, and they've got they've got that platform, and they've got such a vast audio audience, and it's just total rubbish.
Well, there is an argument that they've just blown, actually, and as of middle to end of this year, 2 years ago, the BBC was the largest media organisation in the country by a very long way. Newspapers couldn't hold a candle to them. BBC have foreign correspondents in almost every capital in the world. I think even the biggest newspaper, I think the Telegraph, only has a dozen foreign correspondents now. So if you wanted to do something in journalism, which principally, if you're a journalist, was whatever you did, you had to be able to come into work on Monday. That's the point of being a journalist. So don't muck it up. If you want to do something in journalism, the easiest, safest way to hold on to your job is to do what the BBC just did. Whatever the BBC just did, do that. Now, I think that's changed, and it's going to change, because as of the end of this year, we're going to have Apple TV is better funded than the BBC. Netflix is already better funded than the BBC. YouTube is launching as a TV platform. I think that's going to be absolutely enormous. Yeah, I mean, those three are going to push by themselves. They're going to push BBC into fourth place as best funded media organisation in the country.
Yeah,
that will have an effect.
Yeah, a massive effect. With your job, do you get much time to go out shooting, or are you too busy in the office?
Yes, never. I mean, like anybody in the world shooting, never as much as you'd like. But I definitely get to go to unusual places and do unusual things, and I really like that.
Yeah.
So year before last, I think it was, yeah, might have been last year. No, it might have been last year. I went to China, which is where the pheasant comes from. And I went up the Yellow River, and actually, I tell you what, you know how expensive shooting is, generally speaking, if you're a gun. Right, get this. So I flew to Beijing, which is pretty easy because you basically go over the North Pole. We're pretty close to Beijing. And I go not quite over the North Pole, not far off. I went to Beijing and I flew an hour up the Yellow River to a strange little town called Linfen. I got picked up by a gamekeeper and a translator in a jeep and driven. It was a Willys Jeep, but with Chinese branding. They just basically nicked the whole thing.
Right.
And we got driven 2 hours up to the hills. I had 50,000 acres. That's 200 square kilometers, all to myself. And because nobody else was there at the time, I had a hotel to stay in, and I had 2 days where he just drove me around on what was half shooting pheasants in their completely natural surroundings. And they put a few down there, but it was unusual because it was a very kind of alpine. It was very like the Swiss Alps.
Really?
You'd have these kind of grassy pastures with rocks exposed on them, and standing in the middle of the rocks, there'd be pheasants lecking, just like black grouse do in this country. Yeah. I mean, this is what they do when they're there. And I would get to walk up those pheasants, and then there would be very rare pheasants, which we weren't allowed to shoot, and he would point those out to me so I could look at those in binoculars. I had the most fantastic day. Whole package, including flights, £1,200.
Really?
So that is cheaper than, you need to take 4 days off to do the whole thing, but that is cheaper than going. Unfortunately, since then, because of the whole bat COVID thing, they've tightened up on shooting locally. So I don't think it's possible to do this year, but I hope they'll open it up again next year.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. That sounds awesome.
It was amazing, actually. I've got some stag's antlers I've got to put up, but I'll tell you what, I'll just get it. Hold on. So the one trophy I've got in my office is my best cock pheasant tail from China. that sits in a jar on a shelf.
I was always a big Reeves pheasant fan. I love them because they're such a character.
Yeah,
but they're so nasty.
Oh yes, they
absolutely
really are,
gorgeous.
Yeah. Have you got some? Have you got Lady Amherst as well? They're supposed to be very nasty.
Yeah, I've never played with them, but yeah, I've heard the same. But I was gonna get some Reeves this year, but I ended up, because I'm a reservist as well as do everything else. Don't sit still. I ended up doing some testing for COVID, so that's put a big dent in my organisation for the year. Let alone COVID being in the way as well. So the shooters had to take a little bit of a back seat for me this year, and I've paid for it, to be honest. I had fox problems. If I was going to have a problem, it was going to be this year, and I think I've just about had that year. I have electric fence units going wrong, units that go wrong which shouldn't be going wrong because they're nearly brand new. I've had a fox not get in the pen once but 3 times, and each time I've shot the fox and thought, right, yeah, great, I've sorted that problem now, and then went back a couple days later, it happened again.
It's funny. It's just it just shows you've got to have your eye on the ball so much when you're keeping. Take a week off and it all goes wrong. Yeah.
I was away for 3 months in the end, and I came back and I had 2 weeks to catch up on though I'd been organised and I'd got somebody else to do my job while I was away, I'm self-employed, so it makes no difference to me. So I'd got somebody in the garden to keep on top of the lawns and do the bits and pieces. I'd had somebody already revved up, ready to go for the shoot side of things. I'd even left a list of what I wanted to be done and how I wanted, to a degree, how I wanted things to be done. And I came back, I had a week in the garden. That week, the next week, I got a phone call. Dan, can we bring pheasants tomorrow? I went, no, there's nothing ready whatsoever. Bring them next week, and I'll be organised. And I was, but I've been on the back foot every time, and it's been
really
one of them
tough,
years.
yeah.
You can't help it. You know, COVID's been a problem, and you know, I chose to go away testing in the day. You know, I could have stayed at work and carried on.
Yeah, it has been one of those years. It's also been a lovely year in some respects. I mean, you know, being out in the countryside, this has been the year to choose to do that.
Yeah, we've had the weather, that is for sure.
The weather's been glorious. I mean, if you had any kind of garden at all, or even some, you know, the fields and the moorlands and the woodlands behind you, you know, whatever it is, that's been the place to be. It's been fabulous.
When the COVID all started off, I spoke to a friend of mine who's got a game farm up the road, and quite a big shoot, 6 days a week jobby. And I said, you know, what's happening with the pheasants this year? And he said, well, we're still rearing. He said, things are still coming in. I think they're a bit more expensive, but we're taking the 50% deposit. I went, all right, cool, sorted. And I spoke to him once lockdown came. I went, how's things? And he said, yeah, orders are good. He said, but I'm so stressed with people. And he said, I've never seen so many people on the estate.
Yeah, that's been a real problem. That's true. Absolutely. Yeah. And all over the country as well. And it's actually I'm doing a podcast, I hope, next week with a deer stalker who talks about how, you know, normally people who live in villages were walking around the village. They're now walking in really wide circles around the villages, and they're displacing some of the bigger wildlife, or all the wildlife where they're walking, because they're taking the dogs with them, you know, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So he says what's happened around him, he's very keen on his road buck, is he has good quality buck in forestry, which he just can't get onto because they're stuck there. Out in the moorlands, poorer quality moorland bucks, and he has a happy time shooting those. This year, the good quality bucks being pushed out in the moorland displaced the poor quality bucks. He's been shooting some really big animals, but of course, the moment they've gone, then the other bucks come back in again, and it has sort of unbalanced things locally.
Yeah, I can imagine that's big thing. I've had people on mine, you know, where they shouldn't be, think, how have you got there?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
There's not even a footpath here. There's not even remotely some form of footpath here. Nettles up to here. You think you're a brave man to get here, you know.
Has it been bad over in the east where you are?
What people wise?
The disease, the epidemic.
Yeah, it's been bad enough. We've had it. I think we've had it fairly easy compared to most of the country, to be honest. But because we're all antisocial up here, so we all hate each other anyway. So we don't see no one.
So it's same here in the West Country. So, but I mean, we've hardly had any cases.
Yeah,
really.
we've been fairly. We've had our fair few cases, but I think as a whole, we've done very well.
They might have died with COVID rather than of COVID. You never know. But I mean, heaven knows what's going to happen next. But it's been, because there's been a very low risk of getting it. You know, we have been able to live our lives, I imagine, rather like the 1950s. Actually, it's been like that, which is I'm afraid I'm all for it.
Yeah, I can certainly cope with it. It's been easy for us, but me and my other half have both been able to work still, because she works with horses. I work with, I've got the pheasants I was testing, so it hasn't affected me a huge amount. Apart from, when I ordered something on Amazon, it was a little bit slower than normal. Prime didn't mean prime, but apart from that, it was
what a tragedy in your life. Oh,
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so when you order, I've got to ask just on Amazon. So everybody has developed a bit of an Amazon habit, and I saw a lovely photo. It was a picture of a kind of medieval miniature of one of those kind of incredible looking popes with gold mitre, gold, and he's leading a dragon on a chain, and somebody's written underneath it, some of the weird stuff I bought during lockdown.
Yeah.
So what's the weirdest thing you bought during lockdown?
Well, what how did
that you were convinced was going to improve your life?
Do you know what? Actually, some of the weirdest stuff I bought is my podcast stuff, to be honest. That is when it all started. That, honestly, the habit has started from there. I've spent an absolute fortune. I've got, I've got a mic there. I've got another one there.
I know, not just a mic, on a boom. I mean, that's really smart. Well done.
And it's absolutely horrendous. I bought some wireless ones. So I've got a little one now just under there. Look,
yeah, good.
Which actually, same quality, brilliant. So I've wasted quite a bit of money. Hopefully my other half won't watch this.
Well, she won't watch this far, will she? I mean, no,
exactly.
You have to be very dedicated to want to get this far. Exactly, that's right.
I bought a new gun cabinet.
Oh, did you? Well, that's you got to have that. That's really important.
That was an odd one.
It's given us the chance to kind of sit there and look at something and go, how do I justify to myself that the business or I need this thing?
Yeah.
And I mean, luckily the business with Fieldsports Channel, it's always very simple. You can't have it. But with my own income, I still do a couple of sort of side jobs in journalism. And so I still get a bit of money that way, and I have been able to look at it and go, right, the money I got for that column over there, I think I deserve a new camera. Oh yes, I think so. Exactly. And you can even think to yourself, well, good heavens, if everything goes wrong, because you've always had this problem with COVID, the economy has not been great. We have, I'm glad to say, come through it okay, but you. Sitting there in March and looking at it, you're thinking to yourself, oh Lord, will we make it to September? Well, as it is, it's been fine. But you think to yourself, well, if I buy this camera rather than the business, then if it all goes pop, I get to keep it, which is good.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not a healthy way of thinking, I know.
No, I've got to the habit now of either the packages get sent somewhere else when I order them, or I order them so I know I'm at home and the other half's at work. Yeah. It's become a big hiding game, really. She goes, oh, what have you bought now? Nothing. And just upstairs with it,
Exactly.
Hide in the office, open it there.
That's right, sort of negotiated settlement, package. Well, your packages go one way, hers go the other, and, neither of you can judge the other one for getting them.
Exactly.
That's quite right, exactly.
So you say, obviously, journalism's where you started. How did the Fieldsports Channel happen? What was...
Oh, good heavens. So I have a fairly standard line. I will tell you anyway about how I found David Wright begging on the streets, and I made him into the man he is today, which of course he will subsequently go online to deny. But I seem to be doing more of these podcasts than he is, so I think I'm winning on points at the moment. David was. It's like, were you David Wright? David was a talented news producer at ITV, and he was doing a story about wild boar in the southeast of England and how to deal with them. And he got me on as I was editor of Sporting Rifle magazine at the time. And he got me on as what's called a talking head, a presenter's friend, to explain, about wild boar. And I said, what we really need to do is we need to go to Croatia, because that's where they do them. They look after boar very well. And so I got on to a lovely guy called Tomo Svetic, who runs Artemis Hunting, who takes trips out to Croatia. And ITV books basically a boar hunt. Marvellous. Those were the days. And actually those were the days, because you would get a camera person. I don't think we got a sound person. We got a production assistant, David, me, four of us plus Tomo flew out to Croatia to do this piece. And while we were there, he and I were chatting about, how does TV news work, and I was telling him about how the world of magazines works. And we sort of came up with the idea that if you could collide, a weekly magazine like Shooting Times with TV, because you can stick this stuff online now. And neither of us had any idea what YouTube was, and none of us even mentioned YouTube. At the time, it was something to do with skateboarding cats. It was not really for us. Well, we thought maybe you would have, you'd have a thing there. And I suppose, this is the bit where hindsight plays a great deal of, helps a great deal. the people were sort of falling out of love with magazines at the end of the early 2000s. They in the 1990s, if you went to a game fair, and at the time I was a columnist on Shooting Times, I went on to be to launch a magazine called Sporting Shooter. If you went to these game fairs, people really loved what you did, and they it was where they got basically all their information that they needed in their lives. That wasn't to do with marriage or girlfriends or boyfriends, really.
Yeah.
And in fact, probably had a bit to do with that too. By the end of the 2000s, they had discovered the internet, and although the jury is, I think, still out on what it is the internet does well, it's certainly very good at telly. So YouTube is a success. It's very good at connecting people. So Facebook is a success. And it's very, very good at, information. So if you want to find out about something, you can get a little 300-word article or a 30-second video about it, or you will learn very, very quickly, which is one of the reasons I said earlier that I'll be the judge of that has become the motto of the British viewer. And if you want to get something across to a large audience now, you do not tell them that thing. You say that thing in a manner that they're likely to watch, and you kind of put your arm around them and say, this is what I think, and if you want to think that, that's fine by me. That is how mass communication works. And let's just add, and that again is where Packham fails, because he is trying to tell people things that they must think, and I think generally speaking people resent that. So we were lucky. YouTube worked for us, and the audience is totally phenomenal, and we're on, in terms of individual people who watch our show, who we can now reach on behalf of our advertisers via Google advertising, we're now on 7.5 million people.
Are you really?
So if you're Browning or Beretta or Blaser or whoever you are, you want to sell shotguns, I think we're probably the biggest audience of hunters and shooters that the world's ever seen.
I did see the one on the semi-automatics we did not so long ago. I disagreed with the whole thing completely. Benelli's the way forward. But
you would say that.
I'm a big Benelli fan.
That was so funny because we put it. It was an idea we had to find out about people's kit, and we put it out in March 2020. People had a lot of time on their hands by coincidence in March 2020. My goodness, 3,500 responses. I'm knocking on somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million individual pieces of information have come back. And I look at it and I think, God, I can spend the rest of my life looking at this stuff and sorting it into categories and columns and telling people what they think.
Yeah.
But, it's not me. Don't blame me for telling you this. That's what the viewers said.
No, I'd say I'm not surprised the Escort won for most of it, because that is the Hatsan. There is a very good cheap gun which comes with a good warranty, and I had one. I had one on the gate once upon a time. Drove around the corner. I went one way. The shotgun went the other. It all cracked, fell to bits. I picked it up. I rung Escort up and went, "Can I buy a new stock, a new forend?" They went, "Yeah, sure." It was cheap as chips. It was, it did its job as a work gun. I couldn't fault it.
And you still prefer Benelli?
Yeah, I found Benelli is a little bit more reliable. And actually, I can shoot the Benelli a little bit more. I don't get the jams, and actually I can hit stuff, which is a rarity for me, I can assure you. A lot of my friends always say to me that scene out of Predator, when they get the big machine gun and start mowing down the trees, that's sort of me when I start shooting.
Yes. Well, that's why you need a Benelli.
Exactly.
I can see why jamming would be a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. I need all three.
I did one of our subjects the other day was it was a nice line. I think I might have slightly wasted it, but it was he put it across very well. We were shooting rooks, I think, and he went click. He said, Bob Marley, and I said, Bob Marley. He said, yeah, jamming.
Yeah. Brilliant.
They've been very successful. We did moderators last night. Wildcat moderator came out on top. That's the first time. Well, it's a British-made product. I've not seen a British-made product win. We just don't have the manufacturing industry anymore.
So the moderator's the next thing I've got to upgrade on my 223. I'm still running on mine as an old T8. If you can remember T8.
Exactly.
And it's now starting to burn
because
out.
It would rust.
Yeah, you shake it like that, and it's like a maraca now. It's really got to go, but the paper it's the paperwork that's putting me off. The paperwork of sending it in to the police to get the 1-for-1 to.
Oh, I know exactly.
So
it's just painful, isn't it?
But I'm going to put in for 2-3 as well, so I'll do all two together. Yeah,
exactly. I've got a massive and ancient, but I mean it's made out of tooled aluminium. I think Pez moderator, but I mean because it's bright silver in colour. I mean, people typically when they come out. I had a friend I was taking out stalking. I lent him my rifle with this huge thing on the end, and he said he put his sunglasses on to carry it. Which was highly amusing.
Yeah.
I've now covered it in camo tape.
That's the way forward. Camo tape's the way forward.
Yeah, totally, yeah. Yes, exactly, yeah.
What was I going to say? Something about moderators. No, it's gone. It's
gone. Well, that's all right. It is the sound of silence. One of the funny things about moderators, we get a lot of comments on the channel from Americans going, "Gee, you guys are allowed moderators. You're allowed suppressors and silencers." And of course, that generally speaking, they're not allowed them.
Yeah.
Which is this extraordinary kind of Hollywood thing, because Hollywood showed silencers in a rather bad light, as something you might use to shoot the president with, and we have a situation where I think more than half of Europe now allows moderators. And because of noise in the workplace rules, actually, technically, you would have to use a moderator if you're using it professionally.
Yeah.
Because you have to have noise below a certain amount of decibels. So you've got EU legislation saying you have to use a moderator on one side, and then EU countries going, "Oh, I don't know, they're a bit dangerous on the other." But I mean, luckily, they're all coming around to the idea.
Yeah.
We don't. Go on.
I know a lot of stalkers who, especially stag stalkers, when they take out the paying guest, they won't use a moderator there because it's the noise is a part of the, the experience. Yeah. But
part of the day, yeah.
You get into their gun cabin, and every other rifle's got a moderator on top of it.
Of course it does.
That one.
I had a lovely story about it. We can't use. Some of the supermarkets don't want us to use lead shots to shoot pheasants with now. Yeah. So one gamekeeper told me about how 15 or 20 years ago, he would line up the pheasants shot on the day, he'd line them up all on the fence, and he'd shoot them again, just so that the people in the shops would get that sort of sense of crunch, that they would otherwise miss.
I think Baker will need to bring back the cartridges, because their cartridges were cheap and pretty much lead free. They had to sort everything else in, because it was made in the USSR, that had sort of bits of bike chaining and everything else.
Oh, it's just stuff they found on the floor, exactly.
Yeah, right. Mostly dust and dirt.
That's what you want.
Always remember
amazingly good for barrels.
Always remember duck shooting then, before the lead ban came in, and you'd sort of get a poof with a normal cartridge, and then just as the night would come in, it'd be boom, and there'd be like a 4 or 5 foot flame come out the end of the barrel, and you think, "Yep, that
was a flame with that." So a mate and I were up on Exmoor, and we're chasing after rabbits, and we were on the tailgate of a Land Rover with this absolutely ruthless farmer driving. If you did not shoot the rabbit, he would just drive you straight into the hedge, every time. But it was a reasonably misty night, and we were driving down the side of a hedge, and there was a rabbit up ahead of us, and it's funny, I didn't really clock it until afterwards. But there was a kid on a moped going along. It was dark, and you could hear. I didn't clock it. It was going alongside the road, and then suddenly out of the gloom, these 4 great sheets of flame come out, and you can hear him going as he sped off down the hill. It was a terrifying moment.
Yeah, the good old days.
Well, right. You can still do that.
I'd better leave it there. I need to go do some work.
All right, good for you.
But thank you very much for talking to me. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, you've been great. Thank you, Dan. That's very kind of you.
Thank you. And I look forward to listening to this one back. I don't like listening to myself, to be honest. I'm editing.
You're good. You come across very well.
Brilliant.
No, thanks a million, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Kind of you.
Catch you later. Bye.